Hello and welcome to Heartlight Vedic Astrology. Today I was going to go through Vedic Astrology Jyotish analysis for the full moon or Purnima that's happening today as I'm recording this, 26th of December 2023. And it seemed like the overall kind of vibe or theme for that moment in time is mind your thoughts, heal your feelings. So let's get into it. Note beforehand, the information presented here is for educational purposes only and should not be considered medical, financial, professional, life advice of any kind. If you are in need, please contact an appropriate professional for support. If you're new to Vedic Astrology, Jyotish, or my videos, all of my teaching videos on the subject are in my concepts playlist so that they're easy to find. And wherever you see a double asterisk in one of my talks, that means there's a teaching video on the subject so you can go deeper into it. Because, again, astrology and has a lot of jargon, a lot of terminology that may not be familiar to you. And so you'll get more out of it if you learn some of those concepts a little bit more deeply. And with Vedic astrology, at least I toggle back and forth between English and Sanskrit. So um, some of the terminology might just be in Sanskrit or English or something, depending on which language you're coming in with. And so, yeah, just to make it all more clear and so you get more out of these talks. But especially if you're a beginner, this list of videos will be helpful to you to understand and get more out of the talks, especially my interpretation videos, which this is one of them. So North, South, and East Indian style charts, introduction to navigating a birth chart, the Lugna, also known as the Ascendant Rising Sign First House, introduction to the constellations or Rashis, constellation and Rashi categories, planetary aspects, natural, benefic, and malefic planets or grahas, nakshatras, lunar mansions, also known as lunar mansions, parivartana yoga, which is a planetary combination, and then the symbolism of each planet. I've done videos on each of them, and they're in my planets or grahas playlist. And then also you'll see I go through house by house when I do interpretations typically. And so to learn more about each house and what they symbolize, I have whole houses, bhavas playlist you can check out. Alrighty. So, this is the chart for the full moon, the Purnima that's happening today, December 26th. That's happening at 1932, so 7:32 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The day lord of this moment in time is Mars, and the hora lord or hour lord is Saturn. And so already there, we're getting a combination of kind of old and new. Because Saturn is kind of the traditionalist, and Mars is the innovator. So, it's like there's some actually potential conflict of old and new guard. The Dasha period of that time is Rahu, Saturn, Saturn, Jupiter. And the thing to note about that I think is significant, especially when you see Saturn in its own sign in the 8th house down here in the lower right corner, is that Rahu Saturn period started 17th of July, 2023. So this looks like something, at least the underlying energy here has been going on for a while, probably since midsummer. And it looks like it's going to be going on for a while because we don't shift from Rahu Saturn into Rahu Mercury until 23rd May 2026. So I think that's important as part of the context for this moment in time. The other thing is that the Antra changed. So the Antra is a sub-period. That's changing. So we're not changing out of Rahu Saturn, but we're changing from Rahu Saturn, Saturn Jupiter to Rahu Saturn Mercury, Mercury on December 28th. So this is going to be a little bit of a flashpoint, I think, because it's a fairly intense chart, and we'll get into that. And so when this Antra change happens, so when the Dasha period, the planetary period, shifts to Rahu, Saturn, Mercury, Mercury on December 28th, we have a lot going on that day with planets shifting around. Because you'll see in this lower left corner, I have circled in bright red Mars and Mercury. And you can see that Mars is in the last degree of the sign, and Mercury's in the first degree of the sign, and Mercury's going retrograde. That's what that line underneath it means. And so they're both Sundi, which means they're both in the first or last degree of the sign, which means that they're unstable. And the other thing is that they're about to crash into each other and form a planetary war. And that's all happening with this entourage change. So that's pretty significant. So they're going to exchange houses. I mean, not a parivartana, but Mercury's going to move into Saturn, or excuse me, Mars is going to move into Sagittarius, and Mercury's going to move into Scorpio. So they're going to clash, and they're going to settle down a little bit. But when Mars moves into Sagittarius, that also means that it's going to be aspecting into the Lagna, into the first house, where Mars is debilitated. So that's going to bring some instability to the whole chart. And if this is a person, the person, and Mars is debilitated, there will be some support though, because by the time the 28th rolls around, Moon will also be in Scorpio. Excuse me, Mercury retrograde. It's always fun to do these astrology videos when Mercury retrograde is going on, especially when it's about to go into planetary war. It's already playing out to some degree. But okay, so on the 28th, the Moon will shift into Cancer, which will be helpful because usually a planet in its own sign is helpful because it makes the planet strong. That's good. But we have this Mars aspecting into the Lugna where Mars will bring debilitation. And Mars is a fiery planet, so it can bring things like anger, irritation, that sort of thing. So with the Moon being full and then the Moon moving into its own sign with this Mars, I'm looking at potentially like a emotional outburst. That's what I'm saying here. So, like I said, intense energies. Okay, over the next few days, it looks like emotional stuff coming to the surface. So the Lugna Nakshatra, the Lugna first house or the chart lunar mansion is Aslesha, which also brings some intensity because Aslesha is symbolized by a snake. And so snakes, they can bite, they can hiss, they can run away. A lot of people are scared of snakes. So it's a flash. Again, it's sort of a flashpoint is what I'm seeing here. The nice thing about Aslesha, though, is that it can also symbolize things like healing. And since the moon, as you can see, has gone to the 12th house of isolated places and foreign places and things, and the moon, as I'll talk about, is an Ardra nakshatra. Ardra nakshatra is symbolized by a storm cloud or a storm, and or it can also be like a water drop of like a teardrop, so it's sadness. So when I see Aslesha with Ardra, the two main nakshatras here, as overriding energies for the chart, we're talking about emotional, psychological healing and sadness, that sort of thing. So, and again, the context of all this, yesterday was Christmas. We're in the holiday period. New Year's is coming up on Monday. So it's a busy social time. And, people will be maybe socializing more than usual or socializing, seeing their family more than usual, old friends more than usual, that sort of thing if they're going home. So that could bring up a lot, stir the pot. And so, like there's that joke, right? If you want to know how enlightened you truly are, go home and spend a week with your family. So there could be a lot of trigger moments here. And it looks like people are trying to keep things together, but already what I'm seeing here is that at least again, if this chart was for a particular person, this person's feeling isolated because again, the rising sign, which is the first diamond at the top of the chart, this is a North Indian style chart, and you count houses, you count counterclockwise. The rising sign is Cancer, or Karaka in Sanskrit, and the ruling planet of Cancer is the moon, which is a planet that symbolizes the emotional mind and the intuitive mind. So the moon has gone to the 12th house of isolated places and places of retreat, sort of thing. And since it's an ardor, it looks like this, again, if this was a person, they're kind of stepping back in order to heal themselves and process their emotions. Yeah. So that's all just the backdrop here for this moment in time. So let's start with the lugna. I started already going there, but let's really dive into it. So again, the lugna Rashi or constellations Cancer, Kark in Sanskrit. This is a movable water sign. So it's movable signs tend to have a lot of activity, and water signs are very emotional. So there's a lot of emotional activity. There's again a lot of churning here. And in Sanskrit, we called movable water signs charajal. Yeah, charajala. Um, again, the Lugna nakshatra Aslesha, the snake. So again, it's symbolized by a snake. So snake bite, medicine, healing. It can go either way, but with the energies I'm seeing here, with the moon going to the 12th house, which is considered a negative house, in Ardra, this is about healing some emotional stuff, some sadness. It looks like, yeah. The moon can also symbolize like the mother potentially, although looks like the house for mother, the fourth house, is fairly strong. Maybe a mother like Figner or nurturing, maybe nurturance in general. Not necessarily a person, but maybe you're going back home and you don't feel nurtured, and maybe that's why you don't go home very much. Um, the other thing is it could be the loss of a woman because the moon is generally considered to be a feminine type energy. Again, but that's classical Jyotish in this day and age, or kind of acknowledging more gender fluidity and stuff like that. So maybe it's just more of a feminine type person based on their energy, not gender or sex. There's going to be some amount of protection for the 12th house because we have Mercury aspecting into the 12th house where it is in its own sign of Gemini. But in this type of situation, the protection is going to be for non-living beings, so like money losses and stuff like that. So it looks like there's a protection of money loss, but it won't necessarily protect against a loss of people or emotional loss, that sort of thing. Um, the other thing is that Mercury. So again, if we're looking at this moon here, we have Mercury aspecting onto it. We also have Sun aspecting onto it. And Mercury and Sun, again, I've already mentioned Mercury's already in a precarious position because it's Sunday, it's in the first degree, almost the first degree of the sign of Sagittarius, so that's going to destabilize the planet. But Mercury and Sun are both in Mula nakshatra. That nakshatra is symbolized by a bunch of roots tied together. And so there's this energy with Mula of destruction, and even the goddess Kali is associated as a deity with this nakshatra, this lunar mansion, this part of the sky. But the sun is a planet that symbolizes the vitality, the soul's path, career, life giving, vital energy. And Mercury is also here, which symbolizes things like rational thought, logical thought, analysis, decision making, communications. And both of them are in this nakshatra Mula. So there's this, I always think of it as like a seed underground. And that can be good. It's like this energy of planting new seeds, but that's a destructive process because a seed needs to transform. And a lot of seeds don't make it, as they pass through the soil. It's a precarious journey, really. But at least there's potential there, right? Luckily, we have Jupiter retrograde from the 10th house aspecting onto Mercury and Sun. So that's going to bolster that because Jupiter is the great benefic. But also, Jupiter is aspecting into its own sign of Sagittarius. So that's some protective energy. But again, we have with this bright red circle, again, that I go back to in the next few days, we're going to have Mars and Mercury clashing and shifting signs. So it's going to bring some instability here. But anyway, with Mercury and Sun aspecting into the 12th house where the moon is in Ardra, that's a lot of processing sadness and reconsidering kind of the soul path that one's on, trying to nurture self through isolation, typically. Um, also, as I mentioned, planting new seeds of purpose and communication, and there's this kind of spiritualization aspect from Jupiter and Ashwini. Ashwini is a lunar mansion nakshatra. It's symbolized by the Kumara tones, which are the celestial healers. They're kind of these rescuing, they come in riding on horses, these kind of rescue energy. But the sun also symbolizes father, boss, authority, and Mercury can symbolize friends. So there might also be friction, development of, father, boss, authority, friends here. Mercury can also represent aunt or uncle. And with the sun there, this might be kind of like an older, maybe bossy type of aunt or uncle, especially if you're visiting home or something like that. And then also because when Mars is currently in Jyestha nakshatra, which has this energy of being an elder, and so and then Mars is going to flip from Jyestha and Scorpio to Mula and Sagittarius, and Mercury is going to flip from Mula, Sagittarius to Jyestha, Scorpio. So there's this like clashing of words and actions, potentially with elders of the family, like father, like an elder aunt or uncle. Because again, what I'm seeing here is that this person might be part of a traditional family. And so, depending on what kind of cultural background there is, in some cultures, like just being elder means that you're in charge and you get to dictate how other people move and behave and, that sort of thing and make decisions. They have to pass everything by you. So whether that's, whether that person actually has wisdom and insight, true wisdom, insight, and compassion when they're doing this or not, that can go a bunch of different ways, right? It can be very stressful. So, yeah, so that's all brewing in the sixth house of enemies as well. So there's some grace here with this Jupiter, but there's a lot going on in the sixth house. So friction looks like. Mars, again, temporarily for a couple days is in its own sign, which creates a ruchaka yoga. That's a Raj yoga or yoga of power. So again, that's this temporarily, this person seems like they're holding it together despite, maybe at least on the surface or uh, in a social way, because we have Venus here in the fifth house with Mars. That's the practical counselor, but also it's like the socializing, magnets, and Venus is in Vishaka. So there might be a little bit of force here because Venus is Vishaka is a nakshatra that's symbolized by a victory game, but it's victory at all costs. So it might be kind of like, you know, uh, what is it? Make it, fake it till you make it. That's kind of the energy here. And Mars is again in Jyestha, which can be a bit of a defensive energy. So it looks like this person might be trying really hard to keep it together, at least for showing face to people and for social purposes. But they may not be, it doesn't look like they're revealing their true feelings, which are unfortunately looks like sadness and despair. We haven't even got Saturn yet, but there's kind of confluence with this moon in the 12th house of Ardra Nakshatra. But at least temporarily, they're trying to, be brave and hold it together and keep it together and not create friction. But underneath, it looks like there's a lot of emotions brewing here. So now we're kind of getting to the general vibe of the chart. So just to note, the Chitra grahas for this chart, so these are planets that are points of vulnerability, are Jupiter, Mars, Mercury, and Venus. So Jupiter and Mercury, I put in lavender here to just highlight them because we are running Antara's sub-planetary periods of Jupiter and Mercury. The other thing to note, Mars and Venus, which are in this fifth house. And the fifth house is the natural constellation for the fifth house is Leo, which can be seen as a stage. So it's kind of like public. The other thing is that Venus and Mars are aspecting into the 11th house of clubs, groups, and societies. So again, there's this attempt to keep it together on the surface for socializing purposes, but deep down, It looks like this person's struggling. If this was a person, but we're talking about a moment in time. So the other thing to note in terms of money, which I sort of already brought up a little bit, because Mercury aspecting into the 12th house into its own sign will protect against some losses, like potentially financial losses or material losses. Also, and then the yogi here is Mars. The duplicate yogi is Venus. So those are two planets that indicate good financial planets, and those two are aspecting into the 11th house of income. So that's also indication that whatever the loss is here, because I was trying to figure out like why is this person sad and upset, if this was a person, and it doesn't seem to be the money. Um, oh, could be. The Avi Yogi here is K2, and that's a planet that's more on the negative side, related to money and finances, and that's in the third house of siblings. So siblings might be having difficulty, potentially with money. There might be maybe this person's supporting their sibling. That could be. But the other thing about the third house is that the third house lord is this Mercury, which is not only Sunday, it's not only entering into planetary war with Mars, but it's also combust. So, and actually Mars and Mercury are both combust. So this planetary war that's going on is not something that's going to be obvious. It's going to be like more of a passive aggressive type thing, because again, at least this person, and who knows about the other person, if we're talking about people there, um, it's going to be undercover. And Mars represents siblings, potentially, especially younger siblings. So there might be friction here between aunts, uncles, siblings. Mercury can also be friends. Mars can represent actions. Mercury can represent communication. So, that's all kind of wrapped up here. So with K2 representing a planet that indicates separation and kind of explosive energy, and the Lord of the third house being combust, retrograde, going into planetary war, Sunday. This getting there and probably jumping ahead, but the third house, it looks like the sibling might be absent or estranged. Definitely going through, I think, a difficult time with all this going on, and that might be part of why this person is sad. But I think it's deeper than that. I think it's deeper, even though there are, I think, issues with relationships here. I think there are deeper issues going on for this person. It's tied in together, but again, we'll talk about it as we go through. So, looks like, again, there's some sparing of finance and material things. So at least that's good. Thing though also to note is that we have 5 planets here: K2, Mercury, Sun, Saturn, and Moon. And then when we do the flip in the next couple of days with Mars and Mercury, we're still going to have 5 planets out of 9 in negative houses. And again, if we were doing a analysis of the birth chart on this, that would create what we call a balarishta yoga. So balarishta yoga is kind of a difficulty in childhood type of combination, planetary combination. So that can indicate health issues, especially growing up. So again, if this was a person, it looks like, even if things have progressed, if this person's an adult now or something like that, it looks like issues in childhood, with the moon and Ardra being isolated, and then the Saturn, I still haven't gotten to it, but we're getting to it, the Saturn um, in its own sign in the 8th house, that can indicate, feelings of isolation, separation, because the moon is in the 12th house of separation, isolation. K2 is a planet that indicates isolation, separation. Mercury can indicate that. Saturn can. So we're seeing a lot of what this person may experienced early on is a lot of feeling isolated or lack of support. Even though on the surface they seem very social and they seem supportive, and they're, for social purposes, they seem like they got their act together. Deep down, it's not the case. It seems like. Um, But again, that balarishta yoga, even if we're not talking about a person's chart, that indicates that there's some difficulty here. And because the moon and Mercury are two of the planets here, that's the emotional mind and the analytical mind. So there's a lot of strain on the mind here. And emotions, yeah. What else? The other thing I noticed here was that there's a lot of dual constellation energy here. So K2's in a dual sign, Virgo, and dual signs indicate and dual planets. So the dual planets are Mercury and Jupiter, and the dual signs are Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces. So the constellations ruled by Mercury and Jupiter. They're dual signs and dual planets, so that means that they kind of flip back and forth. So because of that, it looks like this person, again, if this was a person, they're flipping back and forth. So there's this unsteadiness. Again, there's another kind of level or layer to this unsteadiness that I'm sensing here, despite the outward show of like having their act together. So Ketu's in a dual sign. Venus and Mars are not, but Mars is about to go into a dual sign and aspected by a dual planet. And then Mercury is going into Scorpio, where the dual planet will be with Venus. Sun is in a dual sign with the dual planet, two dual planets on it at the moment. Saturn is luckily not there. Rahu is in a dual sign. Jupiter's a dual planet. And Moon's in a dual sign. So again, there's a lot of wavering back and forth. So yeah, so that's just another layer to the story here. Well, let's start going through house by house. So the second bhava, the second house, that's ruled by Leo. So the sun in Mula, we already talked about that being a challenge because of that, seed transforming underneath of the ground energy. So there's this kind of rumbling underneath the surface here. And the thing is, we have uh, Saturn, this really strong Saturn in its own sun aspect in here. Saturn is all about delays, obstacles, tradition, and Saturn happens to be in a nakshatra called Satabhisha, which is translates as 100 healers, which can potentially be a good thing, but with the natural malefic Saturn there, this can indicate things are difficult to heal. So especially with this balarishta, like childhood yoga thing coming up, um, that can be challenging to the second house. And again, the second house represents family typically, or at least the inner circle, even like friends who are like family, that sort of thing. It can also be finances, but we're seeing that there's protection as far as finances is concerned. But again, it looks like there's a rumbling under the surface here as far as family and inner circle goes. We do also have this Jupiter, so there's this attempt to save, attempt to rescue the situation, the inner circle family potentially here. So again, we're talking with all this combined, we're looking at a transformative time for the family and toggling back and forth between optimism and pessimism because we have Saturn, the great malefic, aspecting this house. We have Jupiter, the great benefic aspect, and Saturn represents pessimism, anxiety, depression, skepticism. Jupiter is like the great compassion optimist. So again, and dual signs, all this dual energy. So there's an attempt here, and not only that, but oral communication. So it may be that some conversations go great, and other conversations not so great, or the attempt to make the conversations go well that don't work, or maybe there's some surprisingly good conversations. It's kind of a mixed bag here with the second house. And again, there may be difficulty with savings potentially, and but again, there's some indication that um, there are good things going on with money, or at least some protection with money. Then if we look at the third house, I've kind of mentioned already, Ketu's in Chitra. Well, Chitra is a nakshatra that's symbolized by a gemstone, cut gemstone. So all those different facets kind of give you this idea of architecture, structure. So K2 is like it's kind of a rebellious energy or explosive energy. So it's kind of like um, there's a disruption here in structure related to the third house. So this could be communication, written communication, like maybe texting and stuff like that, emailing, and maybe that's diminished, especially because there's more oral communication here. Like you're actually seeing, this is during the holiday time, so you're seeing people in person. So maybe you're not texting or emailing as much, that sort of thing. But the third house is also the house of siblings. So, and I mentioned already with the third house lord being Kamba, Sandi, and then um, heading into this planetary war, it looks like there's potential blow up or estrangement or distance with siblings. That could very well be, unfortunately. But again, since Mercury's in Mula, this is also a deep transformative time for siblings. The third house also represents like arm, shoulder, hand. And so since Mercury, the lord of the third house, has gone to the sixth house of acute disease and illness, there might be issues with hand, arm, shoulder type stuff, especially because Mercury also represents peripheral nerve pain, and the sun represents like the bones, spine, and the central nervous system. So this might be even like somebody has neck pain that's radiating to the arm, that kind of thing. And Sun also is a Pitta fire planet, so it can indicate inflammation. So it looks like this person might be having, especially right arm pain, potentially. Maybe it's through overuse or an injury. It looks like. Yeah. Anyway, so that's the third house. The fourth house here. The lord of the fourth house is Venus, which is in Vishaka. So this is somebody who's going to be victorious and kind of push forward at kind of at all costs. So it's kind of like a forced victory, but it's still a victory, and it's tempered because we have this Jupiter retrograde in Ashwini, the rescuing Jupiter, um, aspecting into the fourth house. So it looks like mom here, whoever the mother-like figure is, there's this like attempt to again smooth everything over and try to make sure nothing blows up and that things go well. That's kind of the energy coming from the fourth house. Um, at least probably the mother-like figure is doing their best to try to help out here. Then the fifth house I mentioned a bit already. So we have Mars, Swa, Kamba. So deep down, there's this effort to keep things together, but there's like this defensive energy because Mars is in Jyestha, the nakshatra that's indicated by a talisman or symbolized by a talisman, so it's protective. And it can be physical protection, like a law enforcement type of energy. And this might be about like, setting boundaries so that things don't, go off the rails here, potentially. Or even kind of defensive moves because Mars can um, Mars can be action oriented and that sort of thing. But Mars also is combust, and Mars represents siblings again. So that might be another indication that the sibling is not present at the event if there is one going on. Um, uh, it could also potentially be the loss of a sibling. Because K2 is separation, Mercury, the third house lord, is in Mula, which again, the deity associated with that is Kali, the goddess of destruction. And and Mars and Mercury are they're both combust. Mercury and Mars are both combust cooks, so it might be the loss of a sibling. But that's a potential maybe for some people. But if I looked at the Amsha subcharts, and it didn't seem like that was the case. But we'll look at that just to make sure that I'm remembering that correctly. But yeah, deep down, this person's attempting to kind of preventively, proactively create damage. make things go well. So Venus is on the surface, so there's this, again, um, effort to make things go smoothly, but the energies are going to play out the way they're going to play out, and you can see there's storm brewing here. So, what else did I read here? Oh, and the other thing, okay, so the Saturn in its own sign in the 8th house. So let's pick up on that now. And Satabhisha. That's so the 8th house represents deep psychology. So that's a lot of anxiety, depression, skepticism. So again, deep down, this person is struggling and going through a very transformative period because Saturn is going to slowly go through Aquarius for another 2 years or so. And that Saturn is aspecting on this 5th house. So as much as this person is attempting to keep it together and play nice, deep down, there's this storm brewing under the surface, and it's making it harder for them to be able to smooth things over and keep it together for the sake of even appearances or whatever. Yeah, and then again, this Mars, Mercury going into planetary war, graha, yuddha. That's going to make it tough as well. Looks like things are going to go blow. It looks like things might blow up, or at least under the surface, in a kind of a passive aggressive way, which I don't know might be better than a full public blowout. But it just seems like this person keeps absorbing the hits and not. They're having a hard time processing all of the emotions. So yeah, this Mars Mercury planetary war could definitely mean an argument, but again, they're both combust, so it could be on the surface. It seems like things are still intact, but not really deep down. 5th house also represents children. It represents romance. It represents, and then Venus and Mars are. Well, actually, I was going to say public niceties because, again, the 5th house, the natural 5th house is Leo, so it's like a stage. So there can be, issues with kids, romance here, especially because Venus and Mars, Venus is a partner, loved one, especially a spouse-like partner. Mars is there. So we have, some potential canoodling, but Mars is combust, so not so. It may not. There might be some interest in romance, but it's not happening. It looks like, and that may be part of the um, issue here as well, because again, this person's feeling isolated. We haven't jumped there yet, but maybe I'll just mention it now. So the 10th house or the 7th house lord. So the 7th house is partner, or like a spouse-like partner. The lord of that is the Saturn that's gone to 8th house, so difficulties, long-term difficulties, but also if we spin the chart to the 7th house, the 8th house will be the second house to the partner. So it might be that the partner, if there's a partner, is gone to their family, their inner circle, and so the partner may not be part of the event here. And that might also be causing some difficulty, emotional difficulty. Yeah. Yeah, so the other thing here, there might be an indication here that Venus is the practical counselor, and it's in the 5th house. The 5th house also represents like advice. There might be indications here to seek counseling or advice, especially when we have Mercury flip into this 5th house, because Mercury represents talking. So that can indicate like seeking talk therapy, because especially when Mars flips into Sagittarius, we're going to have 2 fire planets in the 6th house of enemies, so arguments and disruptions. Mars represents siblings, Sun represents father. There's going to be a lot of, and then the fire planets, that's a lot of anger, irritation. And then that Mars from Sagittarius is going to, again, aspect into Lugna. So the whole chart, and it's going to be debilitated there. So again, it looks like the volcano might blow. Um, and so it looks like there might be a need for some talk therapy here, at least indications of that. Yeah. So let's move on to the next houses here. Okay, so this is mostly the same info. It's the same chart and info on the left, but on the right are notes for the other houses. So the sixth house I've already talked quite a bit about. So Mercury, Sun, Mars, aspect by Jupiter. So there's some grace here, but there's anger. This could also indicate infections and accidents, even especially when Mars moves into Sagittarius. But again, there's this attempt to keep a lid on arguing. The sixth house can also represent like middle gut area, so like gastrointestinal inflammation or pain. But it should be relieved, especially with Jupiter aspecting here. So that'll help out. The seventh house I got into a little bit. So the seventh house lord is Saturn. It's gone to the eighth house, which is the second house to the seventh house. So it looks like the spouse or spouse-like partner may have gone to their family. And it looks like there might be difficulties there because Saturn's in Satabhisha with like traditional structure and ideology. So again, there's this notion of like traditional structure and ideology on both sides, like for the native as well as their partner. Um, and that just kind of got me thinking about, how different cultures, especially with holidays, you never really know from family to family, but also culture to culture. Like I remember I had this friend who was German, and they were telling me that he was not married, but his brother was, and his brother had been married for a while, and they even had a kid and everything. But apparently on Christmas Eve, only the parents and the two sons and maybe the nephew, but not the sister-in-law, they got together. So it's kind of like Christmas Eve was about kind of bringing together the family of origin, and then Christmas Day, the sister-in-law would join, which I was like, oh, wow, that's an interesting distinction there. Whereas some people, like, they're like, hey, they'll invite the neighbors over because they don't want the neighbors, if the neighbors are alone. It's like it's about, just sharing the joy and stuff like that. So different cultures, different rules or, thoughts about traditions and stuff. So it looks like the partner um, has a family that's pretty traditional, fixed in their ways, because Aquarius is a fixed air sign, so fixed ideas here. Maybe Indian, because especially when with Saturn in its own sign, so either Saturn in Capricorn or Saturn in Aquarius, that can indicate like Indian culture when we look at Vedic astrology, or at least traditional culture of some kind. So that may be part of why this person seems to be upset and sad because of structural ideological differences in family of origin, maybe, if they're not together for the holidays. They've gone their separate ways. Not, and it doesn't look like it's long term when we look at the amshas. So before anybody flips out about that, like that, it actually looks like relationship wise things are okay. It's just a minor blip, like for the day or something. Uh, but so again, I don't want anybody to worry about that because it doesn't look like that's the case again. But everybody's chart, their own chart. You have to consider your own chart and your own planetary periods you're going through, what planets you're running, and the condition and the placement. So again, this is just a general energy for the moment in time. Then the eighth house, this I thought was actually kind of the crux of the problem, because Saturn is so strong in its own house. It's Swa. You also have the aspect here by Mars, temporarily. So there's this tension between the old Saturn and the new innovative Mars here. Um, in long term, and again, because Saturn is such a slow moving planet, this is a long term re engineering of ideas and deep psychology for this person. And with Saturn being so strong here, and they're running Saturn Antra sub period, this eighth house can be long standing grief, anxiety, depression, or especially with Saturn being in Satabhisha, difficult things that are difficult to heal. Um, feelings of isolation, all the things I've already mentioned before we even got to 8,000. It's like concretized, it's like concrete here. Not entirely concrete because Saturn will move through this, but slowly, slowly. So that's the thing is I think that's why maybe the fifth house is indicating seeking psychological support because you are running this person, again, if this is a person, is running Rahu, and Rahu's in the ninth house of like spiritual community, and Rahu's in Revati, nakshatra that indicates like hospitality and stuff like that. So there may be indications that it will help a bit to find, a positive, uplifting spiritual community. But it can also mean that, it's a little bit of a wild goose chase as well because Rahu is in a dual sign and this massively strong Saturn is aspecting onto Jupiter, which is the ninth house lord. So Saturn is going to slow down and bring its, negativity, pessimism, skepticism to the healing here. There's like this jaded feeling, especially because this has been, Saturn has been in Aquarius since January. So I think it's been a mental slog for this person since the beginning of the year. And then when we started the Rahu Saturn period in July, it became even worse. And then again, Rahu Saturn is going to be sticking around for a while. So that's why I think any support this person can get would be helpful. But it looks like psychological support is important as well as the spiritual support and social support. I think this person, again, if this is a person, I think they need to, use all the levers, use all the tools, not just one or two, is what this person is gonna need. Um, yeah. So again, old versus new guard mentioned that, but also this Saturn period, even though it's like dark and deep and probably lonely, because again, that's all Saturn energy and Saturn's super strong. There's this deep psychological maturation process that's happening. So, and Saturn is in its own sign, which is still helpful because at least Saturn will act as nobly as possible. If, for example, Saturn was in Aries where it's debilitated, like if Saturn was functioning from Aries instead of functioning from Aquarius, like this would be much worse. So not probably happy skippy time, not all rainbows and unicorns, but things could definitely be worse. I don't know if that makes you feel, it helps at all, but it could be worse. So yeah, and again, this eighth house business with a super strong Saturn, bringing down the optimism of Jupiter because it's aspecting Jupiter. Aspecting the second house of family, inner circle, and restructuring all that as well. And also fifth house, children. You got Venus there. There's all the Saturn is, it's making it tough. Even the soft spots that are typically there, and it's Saturn is bringing an edge to them. Yeah. Yeah. So, the 10th house, retrograde Jupiter. Oh, did I skip it? No. Oh, yeah, I almost skipped it. So the ninth house is the ninth lord Jupiter. I mentioned that. So Jupiter's trying, right? Jupiter's attempting here. So this could mean father, boss. So there's an attempt, like there was an attempt by mother to kind of help out, smooth things over. It seems like that's also true of father here, or this could also be boss, authority, guru, even. But we have this massively strong Saturn on Jupiter, the Lord of the ninth house. Rahu's in Revati, so there's hospitality. So father authority, trying to be hospitable, helpful, and a drive towards spiritual community. But again, there might be this wild goose chase because of Saturn on the ninth house Lord, and then it being a dual sign. The 10th house, retrograde Jupiter in Ashwini. It's pretty nice, but we have this massively strong Saturn. And Saturn's debilitated in Aries. So the psychology, deep pessimism in the psychology is not helping work and career. It's probably affecting that. And the 10th house lord is this combust Mars that's about to go into planetary war. So that's not helping. There may be lack of work or a slowdown because Mars is combust, and Mars is going to be in combustion till like mid-January, but luckily it's coming out of combustion, so there might be a slowdown of work or difficulties with work. Yeah, but that should shift in mid-January. And then the 11th house, we have Venus as Swa there, so there's some protection there. That's nice. So socializing with groups and groups and friends will probably be better than family. Maybe escape a little bit with, friends at, the local pub or something. Uh, um, but you do have this, swapping with Mars and Mercury, combust, and planetary war. So there will be some shakeups, looks like, with groups as well, unexpected. So I think overall a good social period with friends and groups, but, there's some similar underlying tensions, conversations. Income should be good because Venus will aspect its own sign, and Venus and Mars are both yogi and avi, or yogi and duplicate yogi. So it looks like at least income should be good, even if work would slow down. And the work slowdown might be due to holidays, or call it holiday period, or beginning of the new year. Things shift for people then. They're usually recovering the first couple of weeks from the holidays, and maybe not spend all their money on Christmas or something. So, then the 12th house, that's kind of where we started. So we're full circle here. So moon aspected by a compass, Mercury, sun, soon to be Mars, contemplating sadness, feelings about purpose, work, communication. So this person's really churning emotionally and contemplating things. So again, there's this current family structure traditions that may prevent being with partner, which is, kind of bumping up the sadness here. The person is, again, if this is a person processing feelings, considering new directions with this Mercury, Sun, and Mula. And Mars will be in Mula soon, so not just thoughts, but thoughts come and then the actions, right? So typically, unless somebody's really being spontaneous, but that might be with Mars and Sun with all that fire and the sixth house of not only enemies but also daily habits. So there might be like that whole New Year's resolution energy coming through here. But I think the thing is that all of this struggle is worsened by the long range mental health issues that this problem seems to be having, even stemming from childhood. So yeah, it's pretty deep here, despite outward appearances of everything potentially being okay. Okay, so let's take a look at the subzodiacs, also known as the Amsha, subdivisional charts, microzodiacs, all different names for the same thing. But these subzodiacs will give some indications. The thing is, you always have to bring the subzodiac information back to the natal chart. But the subzodiacs can indicate, especially timing of things, and give more kind of nuance to the natal chart. So let's look at relationships first, since that seemed to be a big deal. So the Dasha period, just to reiterate, currently Rahu, Saturn, Jupiter, moving to Rahu, Saturn, Mercury on December 28th, and then moving out of the Saturn sub period, because again, I mentioned Saturn was a pretty big deal in the natal chart. Excuse me. Oh, hopefully I don't get hiccups now. I take a drink of water. And then again, moving into Rahu, Mercury, late May 2026. So And, Saturn doesn't move out of Aquarius until 2025. So, Saturn's a big deal in this chart. Um, let's see, the Navamsha D9, this is a spouse and kind of general subchart here. As I think I mentioned when I was going through the natal chart, is that luckily all the grahas that are running here, so Rahu, Saturn, Jupiter, Mercury, are all pretty well placed. Jupiter is negatively placed, but again, Jupiter is only running for like 2 days. So that's where this kind of blip is. And the other thing is Jupiter is not it's exalted. So, and the moon, so Jupiter is in Cancer, which is ruled by the moon, as moon is aspecting the, lavender arrow, it supports Jupiter more. And Venus is there, which might seem good, because Venus is a great benefic, but the thing is that Jupiter is a sole enemy of Venus. So there might be like a little, little tiff here with a partner, but with Moon there and Venus there, those are both emotional planets. Like this person is in a pretty good place. Like, even if you compare this 8th house with Jupiter, Venus in Cancer, with Moon aspecting here, personally, I would want this kind of 8th house over the Saturn in Aquarius in Satabhisha, because this person is going to be much more optimistic and emotional, whereas the other person is going to be more, when they're processing, they're going to be more distant. This person's probably going to talk a lot, kind of talk it out with their friends and stuff like that, whereas the other person is just going to go isolate and lick their wounds and try to work through it themselves. Um, so anyway, but mostly good here with the Navamsha. So that's, again, I think probably a relief for many people. It's Dracana, this is siblings, this is the D3, is the second chart here. All the planets are well placed, so that's good. But I think, again, if we're looking at nuances here, there are some, indications. So like the moon is in the 12th house again. So the other thing is Mars is debilitated and it's in the 9th house. So, but the Mars aspecting into the 3rd house of siblings, there's some strength there. So even if, what I was getting from this is that even if sibling is not present at the events, like maybe they're married or something and they've gone with their partner's family for the event, like during the holidays or something, that actually their partner is doing well, and is okay. So that's, I think, good news. What was the notes here? Okay, so Saturn is in Aquarius again, and the fixed ideas, hello, traditional ideas, and it's in the 4th house of family line. So again, that's bringing this notion of strict ideas coming from the family, potentially mother. The other thing is that this really strong Saturn is aspecting onto the lugna of the 3rd house of the Draconox, the 3rd Amsha. So that can bring issues. Yeah, I mean, it's just especially since you're running a Saturn sub period. That strict upbringing is bringing, sadness and obstacles, delays for the sibling. So they may be processing things as well. So maybe the reason why they chose to not be at this event is because of, these long-standing issues that could be, despite the, mom and dad, trying to make it look all good with their game face on. It's just deep down, it may not really be working in the day to day, right? Because holidays can be a different thing than the day to day reality of relationships. Um, yeah. The other thing is that we're running a Rahu Mahadasha main planetary period, and it's with Venus, and Venus is the sole enemy of Rahu. So there's issues here. even though the planet, it's good overall that the planets that are running here are well placed, but there's still issues you can see. And the other thing is that you have Rahu with Saturn, and Rahu with Venus, and then Saturn has. So you have two natural malefics on Venus. So the other thing is that this might indicate that all the strict family origin stuff, family line stuff, is actually difficult for the spouse of the sibling, and maybe that's why they're not attending the event, is because this, spouse or partner is just like, I can't deal with your family, like they're too much, you know. That's a possibility. Yeah. Anything else? Well, this Mars in Cancer in the ninth house. I mean, that's a debilitated Mars in the area of father, religion, authority. So that's a contentious father, contentious religion. That might be the Saturn and Aquarius family thing. So, um, maybe like I mentioned, that German system of defining, inner family by blood, if that kind of strict notion is being applied here, maybe the sibling and their partner reject that, and they're like, we can't take part in this because we don't agree with this, even though it's a long training tradition. So something like that. But overall, siblings doing well, so that's good to see. Then more relationships. So children, parents, grandparents. All right. So children. Well, Rahu is well placed and Jupiter's well placed. So I think for the day, again, if this is an event, okay. And for the longer Mahadasha, that's good, because Rahu's positively placed. But there are some issues here. Saturn sub-period. Saturn is in the 12th house of isolation, and it's debilitated. And Mercury's also negatively placed, but there's some support here. So Mercury is in a negative house, but it's in a house of Jupiter, and Jupiter's aspecting Mercury. And the other thing is there's a parivartana between Jupiter and Mercury. So that's going to pull Mercury up. So that's helpful because that means that when Rahu Saturn period switches to Rahu Mercury, even though it's a bit out, that should help children. The other thing is that means that there's a lot of learning. Jupiter and Mercury are, the education planets. There's a lot of learning about deep psychology and isolation here. So, whatever this native chart person is experiencing and their way of dealing with childhood, probably trauma, again, from that balarishta yoga, and also how they deal with isolation, how they deal with their emotions. They're going to become the teacher for their children. I mean, we always are, but they're going to become a more positive teacher for their children and teach their children, new tools and new techniques and new avenues for, supporting the self, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. Yeah. So, yeah, and then the child, again, if the parent is dealing with their own issues and the parent's feeling isolated, then they're probably not as emotionally available or present with the children. So the children are going to feel, children are like, they're very sensitive energy. So it might be a little bit challenging here for, the kiddos. But, I think there's potential here for growth, development, learning for the children through the native parents, if there are kids involved here, if the native has kids. So then the Dwadashamsha D12, this is parents and grandparents. Well, looky here. What do we have? So the Rahu is in a negative house. It's in a house of isolation, and also the 12th house can represent foreign places, and Rahu can represent foreigners. So, and then we have Saturn in the 4th house again. So traditional culture, family line, aspecting into the 1st house of Aquarius. So again, we are having Saturn in Aquarius by aspect now. So this is the, family, parents, grandparents with fixed ideas who are foreigners, looks like. Um, so this is a Mahadasha. This is a pretty challenging period for the parents and grandparents. Probably because, this new and old school kind of religion. So, like, what I was seeing here. Oh, if we look at the ninth house, like you see this long kind of golden arrow, a saffron arrow here. So the sun is exalted in Aries, where it sits in the third house, but it's debilitated in Libra. So you have a debilitated sun in the ninth house of father, authority, guru, religion. And you have Mars there. So you have two fire planets. So two contentious. So this could be a father authority, patriarchy that's very contentious but destabilized. It could also be like rebellion against father guru authority, which they may not be used to if they're from traditional culture and they just said, we just accept their ways, wholeheartedly or, blindly. Um, so that's looks like there's problems there. Yeah. What else was I seeing? So yeah, I think cultural adjustment might be a long process for the parents, grandparents. I also like again, if we're talking about like Indian families and stuff, I know at least in the United States, I've heard from people who were born in India who come to the United States, and then people who grew up in the United States. Like they say that they actually have a hard time relating to each other, which even though, I guess technically they come from the same culture, and partly because people who come from India, um, because India's they're not so concerned. I mean, there is like tradition and culture and stuff, but sometimes the families get stricter, even stricter when they come to the United States because they're even more concerned about preserving the culture and faith and tradition or whatever, and they get kind of locked into that um, because they're trying to kind of prevent dilution, I guess you could say, by outside forces or negative forces. Again, if they want to maintain their religion or whatever, or at least from a certain perspective. And so sometimes the families who grew up in the United States are more strict and more religious than people who are in India. Um, And so it's like and even like Indians will say, I've heard them say, like, even Indians from like north, south, east, west don't necessarily get along because India's such a big country. It's like Europe. So it's like, Germans and Spaniards getting together, like Greeks and Scandinavians. Like it's kind of like that. Like there's just certain cultural differences that are hard to bridge, in terms of gaps that may exist. So it looks like the parents and grandparents, if it came in with the grandparent line or the parent line or something, they're immigrants here. They're still adjusting. They're still trying to maintain their ideas that they came with, but there's a pushback. It seems like for yeah. So that's again, it kind of relates. It relates a lot to the native chart here. So some problems, yeah, with parents, grandparents potentially. Then if we look at career income assets, because I did mention money, so let's just see what's there. So the Shamsha D10, that's the first chart here. That's the career. Rahu's positively placed. That's great because that's the Mahadasha. That's the long period here. Jupiter's good. Mercury's good. Saturn though is debilitated in the eighth house with Mars. So luckily Mars is there because Mars is in its own sign. That's going to bring Saturn up again. Bring up a bit, but Saturn debilitated. We're looking at more, worry, anxiety, depression about career because Saturn is also aspecting into the 10th house of career in this subchart. But this Mars in its own sign, it creates it creates a nicha bhanga. So if you're not familiar with nicha bhanga, I have a video on that. But basically, it kind of breaks the debilitation. But nicha bhanga never completely breaks a debilitation. So there's still issues here, I think, with during the Saturn period, which is again similar to the natal chart. So that's not surprising. And even though Rahu's positively placed, the thing is, you have Mars aspecting on there. So it's really strong Mars. And Rahu is with its soul enemy Venus, and Venus is with its soul enemy Jupiter. So there's still issues here. And the thing is, it's Mars aspecting into Cancer. Mars is debilitated there. So I think there's still some issues with like groups, maybe income. But we'll look at income, then it's sub chart for income next. But yeah, so some challenge during the Saturn sub period, but I think mostly okay with career. And then the Ekadamsha, the D11 income. So the planets are positively placed. The main Mahadasha is positively placed. Jupiter's positively placed. Saturn is Swa positively placed. So that's mostly good. There's a parivartana yoga between Mars and Mercury there. So even though Mercury is in a negative house, that'll pull Mercury up. That'll be good, helpful. We also have this Swa retrograde Jupiter aspecting under Mercury, so that also helps pull Mercury up. So even if Mercury is a little wobbly, it's got some help there. It's not going to be completely in the pits. What did I put here? Oh, there's also some support for Rahu because Moon is aspecting into its own sign. So that's going to help Rahu. The other thing is the strong Saturn in its own sign in Capricorn is aspecting into the second house of savings where it's exalted in Libra. So the Saturn period is going to be a really good time to save, it looks like. But the thing is, there may be this kind of obsessive thoughts and actions going around that might be disturbing health and mind, which again gets back to this natal chart. The reason why is that, okay, you have Rahu and Ketu in Cancer in the 11th house. So those planets alone can indicate mental health issues. Then you have Moon aspecting here. So now even more indication of mental health issues. Then you have Sun aspecting here from the 5th house. So that's vitality, health. You have Saturn aspecting here. So you have already Sun, Saturn, Rahu, Ketu. You have 4 malefic planets in the 11th house. So there's all this drive and energy, but it's chaotic and like excessive, addictive even, and debilitating because it's so so much energy in one house. And then when you get the parivartana with Mars and Mercury, then you have Mars coming from the 8th house so you have Rahu, Ketu, Sun, Moon, Saturn, Mars in the 11th house, the energy somehow. So we're talking obsessive thoughts, action, disturbance of mind and health here. So, so even though the money is good, this person might worry about it a lot, and because they worry about it a lot, really push themselves in that area of life. So you got to watch that and try to keep balance, I think. Then the Chatratamsha, this is the D4, this is assets. So there is some challenge here. Rahu and Mercury are negatively placed. Saturn and Jupiter positively placed. So at least Saturn right now is a positive sub-period. And you do, again, same thing. Saturn is aspecting to its own sign of Aquarius in the 2nd house, so it's a good time to save. What I was getting from this Rahu and Mercury in the 12th house, so you could see some losses here. And especially because, again, the 12th house can indicate foreign places and import-export. Mercury can represent business. Rahu can represent foreign things. It might be like some sort of foreign business deal or foreign yeah, some sort of foreign business deal could be a bad bet. And so there might be some sort of recovery that's being attempted here. Or there might be, again, some kind of obsessive energy going towards a bad energy, a bad business idea overseas, that kind of thing. Because Rahu is kind of obsessive energy and ambitious energy, but it looks like there's loss here. So even and Rahu is like, like a big push. So even though this Rahu Mercury could be like a, how do I make cash fast? How do I get to my goal faster? Like energy. But this slow savings thing coming from Saturn in the fifth house to the second house, it's more about the slow turtle wins over the fast rabbit. You know, so you got to watch out for that. It might also be potentially, yeah, maybe real estate, but I think it's more of a business more than real estate that's overseas. But yeah, it's just the slow, steady savings that's really, I think, would be helpful during the Saturn sub period. So yeah. Okay, so then health issues. So that seemed like, pretty obvious in the natal chart, but let's look at the Tajik Shashtamsha D6 first. So that's the first chart at the top. That's indicating acute illness. So Rahu is in a negative house. So that's the main Mahadasha. So yeah, there's going to be some problems here. Jupiter is also in a negative house. But again, Jupiter's just running for a couple days. But Jupiter is there in the sixth house of enemies with moon and sun, mom and dad. And the other thing is Jupiter's aspecting Venus, and Jupiter is a soul enemy of Venus. So again, issues with mom, dad, maybe partner. Again, just temporarily, for a day or two. Mercury's positively placed, Saturn's positively placed, but again, this Rahu is pretty tough, I think. The other thing is there's Mars in the third house. So Mars in the third house creates a karako bhava nasha. If you're not familiar with that, that's when a certain planet is it indicates a certain person is in the house that indicates the same person that can actually create issues instead of goodness, which you might assume. But let's see, Rahu, Jupiter negatively placed, Mercury, Saturn positively placed. Yeah, this Rahu with two malefics on it and the Mars Karko Bhavanasha, there can be issues with siblings. So again, it looks like the sibling is okay. It just maybe that siblings like had enough of traditional culture, tradition stuff. So they might be kind of bowing out or kind of staying away because, there's no kind of real conversation about change that the family is willing to consider, I guess. Maybe. Um, yeah, there can also be. Oh, well, you can see here too, like Saturn is aspecting into Aquarius again. So we keep getting the Saturn in Aquarius in the second house of family. So issues with family, obstacles with family, things that aren't changing with family. So it's a traditional family. So, it's it is what it is. But that's the thing, right? It's like traditions help families stay stable, but sometimes they become calcified and then you can't move or change or shift anymore. If things can't evolve. So even good evolution can't, instead of and we'll see, like, actually, when we look at the next charts about spirituality, like, stability is definitely important for the person. Again, if it's a person or this moment in time, but it's this balance of old and new, like what we started with, like right, the day lord and the hour lord, Mars and Saturn, like old and new. Like how do we evolve? What do we keep that's working, and how do we start to shift and grow in new directions? So yeah, so some acute illness indications here for the long period. Then the Tajik Ashtamamsha D8 chronic illness. So Rahu's positively placed. It's got a strong dispositor. Jupiter's retrograde, exalted. That helps Rahu. and it's aspected by Jupiter as well. So that's good for the long period, Rahu. Saturn is in its own sign in Aquarius again in the 6th house. So, again, enemies, long-standing, traditional, fixed ideas, and the Saturn is aspecting the 3rd house. So, the other thing is Saturn is aspecting onto Mercury, so logic, rationality, that sort of thing. It's going to be hard to make decisions. Again, maybe because this person, since they're so dual with all the planets and placements of dual signs and dual planets in their natal chart, with Saturn on Mercury, that can indicate difficulty making decisions. And then Saturn on the third house and obstacles with siblings, and also again the arm thing. Looks like there might be an arm thing going on. Arm, neck, from the neck, arm, hand. Yeah. What else is here? So, this is not so bad. I mean, I was glad to see Rahu so well supported and it being a long period, but there's still some issues here. And again, with the mind, right? And we even saw, I didn't mention the moon because we aren't talking about moon dasha or antara period, planetary periods, but the moon is in a negative house, in D6 here. So, the Bamsha D27 though, this one concerned me frankly, and this is about strength, general overall strength, and I would even say resilience. This one concerned me. So Rahu, Saturn, Mercury, all negatively placed. Saturn and Mercury, so two planets that represent isolation, are in the 12th house of isolation. Rahu is in the 8th house of deep psychology. And with Rahu, we have Sun. So the planet symbolizing sun and vitality, and the moon is aspecting here into this house. You can see this whole like kind of purple loop or oval. So you have moon, Mercury, Rahu, sun. So moon is mom, sun is father, Rahu is maternal parents, Ketu is paternal parents. So, the whole family lineage really. And then when we have moon with Ketu Rahu, that's indicating mental health issues. Um, I'm just seeing this person having a really tough time bouncing back, physically, mentally, emotionally. So that's why, again, this I see correlating with what I saw in the natal chart. Of I think this person needs to really stay open. Again, if this is a person, really stay open to learning about new tools, utilizing every tool they can find to help themselves, rather than doing what seems to be their usual MO of like isolating and just trying to deal with it on their own, because that does not seem like it will be enough. Um, uh, yeah. Where did I write to? Well, at least Jupiter's in a positive bhava, but again, Jupiter's only running for a couple days, but at least it's something. So at least maybe for the day they feel a little bit better, but deep down, lots going on. The other thing about the Jupiter, unfortunately, is that Jupiter's dominated by Saturn because it's in Aquarius, a Saturnian sign, and Saturn is aspecting on Jupiter. So even though there might be a little blip here, and the Jupiter also symbolizes spirituality, and the 9th house represents satsang, your spiritual community. So even though there might be a little bit of a blip, of hope or help from spiritual community, looks like whatever this is going on is going to require more than just, going to yoga class once a week or something, if that's what's going on for this person. And again, the Rahu, Ketu, and Sun Moon indicates potentially mental health illness, obsessive, even addictions. That may be what's going on here as well. Saturn and Mercury in 12th bhava. Difficulty making decisions again. Especially again, we saw the dualness and the natal chart and loss of form business. So that also is popping up here. So the other thing is that if this person invested in some sort of foreign business and they're really looking for a fast, big pop, and that business goes awry, that can sink this person even more. So if that's on the, on the table, then consider that. So this person might lean temporarily on like guru spirituality, but I think they also need psychological support, as was indicated in the natal chart. And that's the thing too, is when I was seeing this, like what came to mind was, I've been teaching yoga for almost 20 years now and doing like Ayurveda. So pretty, as far as I guess Americans go, pretty deep in traditional Indian culture and stuff like that, and Indian Vedic arts and stuff, and then the Jyotish as well. Um, that's the thing, is these are all eighth house things. So um, it can indicate the eighth house. Like the way it was explained to me is like 95% of the eighth house is stuff that people don't want. So like bankruptcy, death, chronic illness, all this kind of stuff. Um, but the eighth house also indicates things like Ayurveda and yoga and Jyotish and other esoterica. If we're talking about, other cultures beyond Indian. But so I've met a bunch of people involved in yoga, Ayurveda, Jyotish or whatever. And, it's easy to kind of like my last video on the solstice. It's easy to get caught up in that. And, it's like the same kind of, if the psychology isn't addressed, and psychology is a different thing than spirituality. If psychology isn't addressed, people can use this stuff like yoga, Ayurveda, Jyotish as like a smokescreen for doing whatever they want and kind of covering up their flaws or whatever. So you really got to suss people out and make sure that they're legit. Um, and there are plenty of stories about how whatever gurus and yoga teachers and stuff have taken advantage of students, and their ego is still there because they haven't dealt with psychology. And I've met plenty of people too who are like yoga teachers who were really nuts. I mean, like, and they just kind of blow everything over like, oh, well, my intuition tells me this, and sometimes it's true, but it's like my intuition tells me this and the spirituality tells me that, and it's like they take no personal responsibility for anything. And that's where it can get, people can get lost in this stuff, especially if they're vulnerable and they come to these practices and they're not maintaining their own personal authority here. And they just believe whatever. It's good to be open, but when you just completely lose your sense of rationality, like, and like seeing, like, okay, let me do this yoga practice or this meditation or this pranayama, and is it actually helping me or not? But I've seen people get lost in practices. I mean, they're chanting for hours a day or meditating, and they're getting more and more lost and disconnected, and rather than moving forward. So I think it's important to respect these practices. For sure, they can definitely be helpful, but you still got to keep one foot on the ground. I mean, and most of us, if you're listening to this talk, you're probably a householder, right? I mean, they make that distinction in yoga. It's like there's a difference between a forest dweller, right? Somebody who's going to go sit in the Himalayas and chant by themselves in a cave and like live off whatever food or plants they can find up there, on their own by the grace of nature or God or whatever, however you want to talk about it. But most of us who are listening to YouTube videos are householders. So we still have one foot in this reality. We still have to like pay our mortgages, go to school, pay our bills. We have relationships, pay taxes, you know. And so we need to find a balance between the spiritual and the emotional, the psychological, and the physical. And kind of like what I talk about. It's like the four wheels on the four tires on the car. Like all four tires need to be balanced and maintained to move forward in life. So the physical, spiritual, mental, emotional. And so again, it seems like this person might be attempting some spiritual um, things that are probably helpful on some level, but I'm just not sure that it's enough, is what I'm getting from this. So just take this all into consideration and advisement, potentially. All right, so then I went and just looked at spirituality. So the Tajik Panchamsha D5 first. This is innate spirituality. So this is, somebody's own natural kind of way with spirituality or kind of aptitude or um, style, I guess you could say. So Rahu's negatively placed. Jupiter's negatively placed. All right, so this is a long Mahadasha that's negatively placed. Saturn and Mercury are positively placed, but they're both challenged for different reasons. So the main overall thing with this D5 was that I was seeing that it's really hard for this person to establish a consistent rhythm. So if they were attempting like a mantra practice or yoga practice on their own, I think they're going to struggle here. Um, so that's why I think, and then they tend to isolate. So any kind of support they can get, even if it's like an app, like maybe start there with like an app so that somebody, you're following somebody else's yoga class or something like that would still be better than doing everything on your own, which is this person's tendency, it looks like. So where's the challenge? So Rahu is in a negative house. It's with its sole enemy, Venus. So that's not helpful. And it's with the moon and sun again. The sun's aspecting here. It's with the moon. So again, we're talking mental health issues. So that's the thing is like, which came first? It's like, did the mental health issues come? And, like maybe somebody's feeling depressed and then they can't motivate themselves to do the practice. And if they don't do the practice, it doesn't help their mental health. Like it can be that kind of chicken and egg type thing. There is luckily a parivartana between Venus and Jupiter, so it helps a bit, but it's still in a negative house. And Saturn is challenged because it's with a debilitated Mars. So we keep getting this debilitated Mars, like inconsistent actions, like kind of splashing about, with actions. So two steps forward, one step back, that sort of thing. And this debilitated Mars aspecting onto Lugna of the whole D5 chart. So again, that's telling me, I mean, Saturn is consistency, but when you have it with a debilitated Mars, it's like one thing after the other comes up to disrupt any sort of consistent practice. And then there's a parivartana between Sun and Mercury. Even though Mercury's placed, it's going to drag, Mercury into the 12th house, where it's Swa, that's good, but it's going to be with K2, it's going to be with Moon, it's going to be with Venus. So there's a swirling of mental, emotional energy. And so, especially if this person is attempting to do like a meditation practice, sometimes a meditation practice takes us farther away from our bodies because it makes us kind of airy, it's a very vata type of practice. It can bring us farther away from our emotions and farther away from our body, and then we get lost in our heads more. That's a possibility. So maybe the type of meditation practice they're doing is making things potentially worse because, again, this um, yeah, it's just debilitating people and taking them farther away rather than integrating them, right? So that's a possibility. And then this Rahu is, again in the 6th house of daily habits. So this kind of there's this attempt, but there's a disruption here. Yeah, yeah. So then when we look at the Vimshamsha, the D20, this is looking much better. And so the Vimshamsha D20 is more about structured worship, like religious type practices and stuff like that. Um, so again, we have a Mars debilitated. We keep saying this Mars debilitated. Mars debilitated in the 4th house. So this might be a disruption, even though we're not running Mars. This might be a disruption with the family line. So even though this person might reject the family traditions, they would probably benefit from finding some more structured practice or community works for them. So, because again, on their own, it looks like they're struggling to maintain a consistent practice that's helpful. So, 3 grahas positively placed: Saturn, Mercury, Rahu. That's great. The shortest living one, Jupiter. That's the only one that's negatively placed. So the long ones are positively placed. That's great. There may be some difficulty with daily practice, but because there's Rahu, Ketu, Venus, Saturn in the 10th house of kind of daily activities. But there's a parivartana between Saturn and Venus. So even though there might be disruptions with Saturn coming into its own sign, that's going to create more practical structure for this person on a day-to-day basis. And that's actually going to be helpful. There will also be some foreignness to this because Rahu, Ketu, Saturn are all planets that symbolize things that are foreign. So again, because Saturn is going into its own sign, that might be some Indian type practice or Eastern type practice. There can also be like a mantra chanting thing going on here because the 6th house Lord Mercury is retrograde in the 5th house, and the 5th house can integrate things like mantra, chantra, yantra, that sort of thing. So, yeah, so there's some challenges here, but again, I think some sort of more structured approach is going to be more helpful for this person, and also something that brings in community, like, because Saturn is also the 11th house lord, that's like clubs, group, society, and so when the Saturn is in the 2nd house of inner circle, it's also the lord of the 10th house of this daily practice. So if somebody can, derive some structure support from a community, I think that would be helpful here for everything this person's going through. And so that is the full moon going on today in just a few hours. December 26th, 2023, the last full moon of the year. So as always, I want to thank you for your time. I appreciate you stopping by to listen to the talk. If you're interested in learning more about Ayurveda, well, I have a channel on Ayurveda too. The YouTube channel on Ayurveda, natural medicine, yoga, homeopathy, and naturopathic medicine. The name of that channel is Nature Source Care, but this channel is called Heart Life Vedic Astrology. And all my teaching videos on Vedic astrology are on my concepts playlist. Also, if you're interested in individual birth chart reading on Zoom, I do those. You can email heartlightastro@yahoo.com for more information. But also, I just wanted to thank you for all the support you guys have given me for my work for the channel. All the people subscribing, liking, positive comments, sharing, donations, asking me to read their chart. It's all very much appreciated. So thank you all for that. Thank you for being part of my satsang, my spiritual community. As always, I hope you found this interesting, useful, and helpful as you navigate the own energy cycles of your own life and practice. So take care, and until the next one, namaste.